Hello, my name is Xenophon Papadimitris. I'm a professor in radiology and biomedical imaging and biomedical engineering at Yale. This interview is part of a collection of conversations with experts in medical software from academia, industry, and regulatory agencies, and is supplementary material for a Coursera class Introduction to Medical Software that will appear in the fall of 2021. Our guest today is Dr. Phan Luu, who's currently the chief scientist at the Brain Electrophysiology Laboratory Company in Eugene, Oregon. Previously, Dr. Luu was the chief technical officer and then chief scientist at electrogeodesics. And just as a disclosure, before we start conversation, I consult currently for Peter Bell, and I have consulted for EGI. So Dr. Luu and I have worked closely together for about 10 years, I think now. So with that, I'm going to ask him to start by telling us a little bit more about himself and the company and what they do, and just to set the stage for the rest of the conversation. Phan, thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me. So a little bit about me. I am a psychologist by training, experimental psychology as well as clinical psychology. So my path into industry, engineering, and regulatory processes of that is associated with the medical device industry is a little bit circuitous, but so I can really speak from the perspective of me learning and picking up the whole thing. So that's a little bit of the context. And the way I got into it was through my research experience using lab developed hardware and software, and wanting to commercialize it. So that was the main motivation, and that's how I ended up here. And of course, developing it for research was a very different experience than developing it for medical devices. You know, in the research lab, if it works, even on the surface, the face validity of what you develop, it was then generally used by everybody until somebody found a bug. so you know, getting from there to something that is cleared by a regulatory agency was a big step. And early on, I, being quite naive to it, I just, you know, always asked, well, why can't we sell this in as a medical device, and how challenging can it be? What's the big deal? So I was rather naive.
Let's describe a little bit about what you guys do product-wise, both at EGI and at Bell. Yeah,
so we use EEG technology, basically the electroencephalogram. That's recordings of electrical activity at the scalp generated by neurons of the brain as they work. And traditionally, well, obviously EEG has been around for a very long time. What was unique to what we were doing is that we wanted to describe the functioning or localize where the signals that we record on the scalp are being generated in the brain. Of course, that's central to the brain sciences, is to be able to relate what we do, our mind, to particular operations of the brain. And so wanting to do that, we realized the traditional way of or traditional EEG technologies using 19 channels of EEG was just not adequate. And so we took an engineering and physics first principles approach to solve that problem. And one of the things we realized right away was we needed a lot of sensors on the head, EEG sensors on the head to do that. And then we realized, well, if we built that, the existing software that allows us to then do the analysis just didn't exist. Outside of very small specialized labs, and even then they were barely usable. So we ended up trying to solve the whole problem, and that's where we thought, you know, we could commercialize it, because as other people got exposed to the first principles, and the whole field of neuroimaging at the time, this was late 80s, early 90s, was evolving. People at the cutting edge of research understood what we were trying to do and wanted to buy what we were building for our own lab. So we took that opportunity, and so there we started the journey.
So one of the things that's unique about your experience, I mean, I assume others have been through this, but you guys built one device company for 20, 25 years, sold it, and now you're starting a new one. So in some ways, I'm going to ask you questions about what it's like to start a company, but you're not the raw founder that hasn't started one before. So you're starting out probably in some ways needed. So how does one start a company? How do you set up a quality system? How do you keep it going in some ways? That's kind of the main topic, I guess, of this discussion.
That's actually a really good context, what you said there, of us starting two companies. One, before we knew anything about developing a commercial product for medical use. And then the second is we knew exactly what was required. So I can say a little bit about the first experience. It was sort of learning by trial and error after we've gotten so far with developing the product, and then fitting it into or building a quality system and trying to fit what we've already done into a quality system was educational to me from a couple of perspectives. First, it was much more time-consuming and inefficient to build a quality system after the fact. And once we got into the quality system, the logic of having a quality system and the purpose of having a quality system made a lot of sense in this way, that if you had it up from the beginning, in a lot of ways, your development can go a lot faster. And I don't just mean by the inefficiency of backfilling and trying to catch up, put in procedures after the fact. But if you follow the QMS procedures, it is sort of like a guide. Never mind the regulatory components of it. If you think of a quality system as a template for how to document everything that you've done, sort of like a checklist. Did you do this? Did you do this? It's very efficient that way. Versus if you didn't have a system to guide you, yes, you sort of know the end goal and you work towards it, but just like anything, without careful planning and a checklist, I mean checklist generically, can have a lot of holes in your thinking and your design processes that only become evident when you have the product in use, either by collaborators or by customers. And that is really the spirit and the intention of why the regulatory bodies want you to use a QMS, because it is best practice. So your question, Zenas, is how do we start it, right?
So you walk into a new company, you have four white walls, and now you need a quality system. Yeah. What is it? What is it? This thing? I mean, so if I think about a student here, listen to this discussion, what does this thing look like?
In a broad sense, the quality management system is exactly what the name is very descriptive. It is a set of procedures. The procedures make up a system. The procedures ensure that you manage the development of the product from conception all the way to the end, when it gets out into the customers. And that as the customers are using it, that their experiences are systematically fold back into your evaluation of your device. The goal of all of it is to demonstrate that whatever you're building, whether it's software, hardware, or a pharmaceutical agent or whatever, that it is safe and effective. Those are the two key words, safe and effective, that the regulatory bodies are concerned with when they evaluate your device. And to to effectively evaluate your device and have confidence, they want to know if you followed best practices, and that's the quality management system. Now, to start a quality management system, there are some key ingredients. The first is you have to have somebody knowledgeable, or at least appoint somebody who is responsible for the overall administration, upkeep, and understand what a quality system is. And then you have to identify the regulations that are relevant to the device that that you hope to build, because there are different classes of devices, and the regulatory standards vary by the class of device. And of course, you know, with each device, there will be standards that are very specific to that device. So in our case, the electrical emission standards are very specific to our device that measures, record, and emits energy, and how the regulatory bodies will look at those. So you have to be familiar with the standards for your particular device class. And so that's just the person. Then, of course, it's best to engage consultants from an external company. They're sort of your objective advisors, and they can serve a variety of roles. One is they can guide you and provide templates for the procedures. It's much more efficient that way because they've already looked through the regulatory standards and are familiar with your device class. And so when they provide templates for procedures and so on, they've already done the work of mapping it to the regulatory requirements. And then you use that as your building block. The nice thing about a quality system is, yes, there are things that you must have to have the check boxes to meet the requirements. But a quality system is actually quite flexible, meaning that it could be adapted to your company and your way of working. So let me just stop there and see if you have other questions related to that.
When you bring in a new person now, especially somebody who came out some sort of a university lab or a program, they're not used to that type of setup. And in the beginning, it can be a little bit of an adjustment. How does it work? How do you guide them into that process? How do you train them into that process? What are the problems? What are the benefits? What do you see when a new person comes in?
That's a good question. The indoctrination really starts with training, and the quality system is, again, you know, I like to think of it this way: if you had no experience, if you have a quality system, if you have no experience of running a business, even actually, and building and supporting a device, it tells you how it should be done. And so the training of any new person will be very specific to their role in the company. So not every a person doesn't have to know everything about the quality system, but they do need to know their role relative to the parts of the quality system that they contribute to. So in engineering, as an example, they have, for a software engineer, they will be trained in the software development life cycle standards. And then they will be trained into other aspects, including best practices for software development, how to translate user requirements into functions for engineering, to think about how that then relates to hazards in the design, how to contribute to the hazard analysis and mitigation of those hazards during the development of the product. Then also thinking about how they can be tested down the line, and then how they may interact with the support department, how they will feedback from customers will impact the engineering, the changes to be made. So all of that training has to be identified. And that's part of the quality system. So for the person who sets up the quality system, they say, okay, given these roles, they have to be trained in these procedures. And then when we hire them, we have to train them. And then we have to document that. So that's how somebody gets introduced. And to the extent that you have the rest of the team and the company trained, they sort of fit right in, and everybody else reinforces that just as a way of working.
Most companies, and I've seen you guys do it over the years, don't produce everything in-house. So you have suppliers, you have subcontractors, you take parts from outside, you take software from outside. Sometimes it's you contract it out, sometimes it's something that exists and you bring it in so you can use it. How does that process work within a quality system setup, right? You obviously, the other company is not you, but you need to somehow be compatible, and you are the manufacturer of record, so you're the ones responsible in some ways in that setup.
This is different depending on the nature of the work. So, and the big difference is between software and hardware. And at what level? So let's take the case of hardware first, because it's a little bit easier to draw that dividing line about when we're responsible and when the contractor is responsible. But ultimately, I can say this: you as the device manufacturer are ultimately responsible for the quality and safety. That can't be pushed off to anyone. And the quality management system tells you how to manage your contractors and your suppliers. And actually, it's interesting in this way. It's not just engineering contract outsourcing. It's also in vendor management. If you buy parts from anybody that goes into building a device, in our case, as an example, when we buy A to D converters, the analog to digital converters for our amplifiers, we have to qualify the vendor. And what does that mean, qualifying? Essentially, it means we have to evaluate whether the vendor has the ability to produce the parts that we're going to be buying from them in a way that ensures that our end product is safe and effective. So as an example, when we buy the A to D, we can buy it from Texas Instrument. For a big company like that operates internationally, they have their quality system already in place. And so in that case, we just say, okay, here are their certifications, and that's the end of our qualification. They have it, we're good. Sometimes you buy parts from other vendors that don't have it. Here, the quality system is pretty clear. You have to audit them, you have to visit them, you have to set up a contract with them that specifically states things like, okay, you cannot change your design without notifying us or consult because we're depending on these performance parameters and so on. So there's a way of qualifying vendors as well. And this is also true for contract manufacturing. In our case, we design the hardware, but we outsource it to contract manufacturers. Again, it's also true that some contract manufacturers have quality systems already in place. which is great. They just show us proof of that. If they don't, we then audit them to see what level of quality control that they have and can ensure. And this is very true in the case of, in terms of circuit board or CPU manufacturing, these big fab houses, they all have certification of quality management systems. That's why they can build chips for a lot of people. So that's already in place. And then, that deals with an organization. Now, for individual consultants, we can contract out the design of boards, or software developers. Their work is fit into our quality system. So they don't have to be trained in our quality system, but their work has to be documented and managed within our quality system. So we manage them very much like employees at that point. And that's how you keep control of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The whole, as I was doing some reading earlier, the whole standards for quality systems in some ways in ISO 9001 starts specifically to allow subcontractors to be hired with confidence, right? That's the origin of that, actually. It's kind of
exactly.
So we're going to switch gears. I have two more questions here. One is about, day-to-day project management, and then we'll have some advice for students at the end. So I know, because I've seen the process in action, that you use a sprint-based project management system. Yep. What is it? How does it help? Why did you choose it? Why is that the process that you decided is the best one? But if you describe it first for students who've never heard of something like that.
The sprint process really is meant to manage projects in a way that makes the work very clear and measurable, meaning that you set up an interval of time that you will manage the deliverables for that period of time. And the members of the team are all very clear on what is expected. So a sprint a sprint is time limited, meaning you as the organization or as the manager specifies that time. It could be from a week to a month or longer, but obviously that's a balance. Too short, you can't do much. Too long, and things can go wrong and you're not aware of it. And so that's a balance. That's the first thing. The second is you have to define your objectives, your engineering objectives, or your project objectives, in a way that at the end you can say something is done or not. And everybody is aware of that, from the engineers to the managers. And breaking down an entire project into sprints helps also track the progress of the entire project. Are things slipping or not? And as part of the management and planning of the sprint, you're always looking out for dependencies. By making things explicit, you think, can this be done, or there are other dependencies? So everybody know what the dependencies are, and the dependencies can be within sprint and between sprints, and it can be between people or within people. I can't do this until I do this, as an example. And it fits really nicely within a quality management system in this regard. In the quality management system, development occurs in phases. And it's important to understand what those phases are. And this will be related to the sprint, of course. So it's divided into 4 phases generally. The first phase is a conceptualization stage. That's where you get inputs from sales, marketing, customers, and prototyping to demonstrate the feasibility. And it's essentially demonstrating feasibility and planning stage. And the planning includes evaluation of potential hazards of the device if you were to build it. What could go wrong in terms of safety and efficacy and the harms that it could produce, as well as what's your strategy for getting the device cleared by a regulatory body. So in these early stages, engineering actually works quite closely with sales and marketing and the regulatory affairs people. And their contributions can be managed as a sprint. They're all, and you coordinate between departments. As an example, that this sprint, we're going to try to do this, but if sales and marketing doesn't get us what we need, we can't do it. So it really helps between departments in that way. And then the second stage is really engineering, the engineering proper. You're now designing, iterating, checking against your objectives, checking against your design relative to safety and efficacy, and then planning for the other stages. How are you going to test things, and so on. And then all of those, again, are broken down. The task of each stage can then be managed in sprints, and that goes all the way to the end. So sprint is, the sprint structure is both organizational as well as accountability.
So if you're a new student, you're sort of done with college, you have your undergraduate degree, you start working for a company, small or large. When as someone who manages a company, what are you worried about, and what would you like the people who work under you to know about, and how to be helpful in that process? What makes a good employee versus what makes an okay employee, I guess? More hands on deck, I guess.
Yeah. What makes a good employee? The way I think about it is this, and this goes back to work management and the team environment and sprints. I think the most important thing is obviously productivity, but that is a little bit too general to have much meaning. I would say the specifics of it is, in even a small company, you're working in a team, and it's always been my experience when working in a team, productivity becomes very evident, especially if there are a lot of interdependencies between people and progress. So, if somebody is working on this particular function in code that's going to be wrapped up with other functions to demonstrate at the end of a sprint, the roadblocks become very evident. The other is like code reviews, working in a team too. Part of the good practice is that code get reviewed by your peers. And so all of these things sort of from sprint to sprint, it becomes very visible. It's sort of like working in school in a group, right? Everybody sort of knows who the person doing the heavy lifting or somebody who's not doing the heavy lifting. And I think the first part of being a good employee is being accountable to your colleagues, your peers. If you take care of that, and your peers, some of them will give you good feedback, meaning that they'll let you know. Others will just sort of like pick up the slack. But ultimately, all of that will get back to the manager, right? And the manager sort of, because the manager has to answer to other managers, their managers, and so on. All of that will in these sprints, and that's also the purpose of the sprint, is to make it visible when things aren't going well. And so productivity becomes a little bit more concrete and observable. And to the extent that you work well with your peers and help each other, I think to me that is one of the things that stand out. The other is the problem solving, and that's how you help others too. In a team environment, who who can help problem solve, who can help others move along. This is where you start seeing skills that are really critical to in real world environments come through for certain individuals compared to others. And that's always, to me, a very interesting process to observe as somebody new who comes into a company and start picking up those skills. Some do it naturally, others require, a little bit of coaching and encouragement to go help others, to solve problems for others. Others just do it naturally. But this is where the big gap, right, between school and out in the real world is that how much can you help others, just as much as doing your own thing.
So I guess we've gone for a while, so we should probably close this slowly. Do you have anything else that we didn't talk about that you've been meaning to say that you didn't get a chance to say, or is there anything else that you think is important?
Yeah, I think the closing thing I would like to convey is, sometimes the reaction to a quality system is that it can be onerous. It could be too much. It's a distraction from your work. It shouldn't be. It should help you work. It should help you organize. It should help make things visible. And if there is a failure, it's more in the management of the system rather than the system itself. Again, because the system is flexible enough to be adapted for the way that the company works, the culture of the company, while still meeting the intention of the quality system. And so, it's a tool that should be used to help you and not be too worried about, or it shouldn't be seen in a negative light. And I would say this as well, to the extent that you can pick it up and make it part of your skill set, you're going to be very, very valuable in the job market for any position you apply for.
Okay. With that, we'll thank Dr. Luu for spending time with us. And thank you for coming.
Welcome.